This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 25th of June, 2023. I had to think for a minute about what year it was. I got a bit confused. Welcome back to the podcast. We had a week off last week for Father's Day. We are back this week, and it's a pleasure to bring the podcast to you. I should point out something that you will probably notice immediately as I talk. I'm missing a bottom tooth. I had an accident this week, and I knocked out a bottom tooth. On the plus side, I will be getting a new tooth from my dentist in the next week or two. But unfortunately, until then, I'm going to be walking around with the grin of a 7-year-old, and it's a little irksome. However, it just happens. Yes, it was very unpleasant to do, and I would not recommend it to anyone, but I'm past all the painful bits now. Now it's just getting the replacement tooth placed back in, and then we will be good to go. Michael is going to be joining us very shortly, I'm sure. He is not on yet, but he did text me saying that he would be on here in a minute. Also, he did text me when I told him that I had knocked out a front tooth with the single word response, dumbass, and then moved on to something else. So it's always good to have sympathy from your friends. A couple of things that we want to talk about today. The first, I think, is this whole Pregozhin thing. Well, let's switch it over here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this Zoom window off real quick so that we can just see the story that I've got put up here. And this is the story from The Intercept. James Risen, former New York Times national security correspondent, writing about Pregozhin and Putin. And I think it's very interesting because, speaking of toothless, this week there was a brief military uprising led by Yevgeny Progozhin, who is the head of the Wagner Group. I call it the Wagner Group because that's the German pronunciation. Is it the Wagner Group? I'm not entirely sure because it's Russian. I would think it would be Wagner Group, but who knows? Anyway, Wagner, whatever. Private military contractor with between 25 and 50,000 men. So let's say 2 divisions, more or less, of troops, took a brief march on Moscow. It lasted for, 16, 18 hours. Some of his forces made it within 200 miles of Moscow, according to him. It was just very weird. First of all, do you really think that even with the Russian army all basically occupied in Ukraine, do you really think you're going to go to Moscow and take the place over with your private military corporation? Apparently, at the end of the day, he didn't think that he would be able to. His grievance, apparently, is not between, and I don't like the way that James Risen puts it here, with the duel between Yevgeny Progozhin and Vladimir Putin. This seems like it was some sort of beef that Pregozhin had with the Minister of Defense, Shoigu, and the Chief of the Russian General Staff, General Gerasimov, who he wanted removed. He launched this march towards Russia, apparently took over the southern military district headquarters, at least according to the videos that he released, at Rostov-on-Don, which is, by the way, 1,100 kilometers from Moscow, 700 miles. So a 14 and a half hour drive, even at highway speeds. In any event, he took over there. Apparently, his forces took over the military headquarters in Pregozhin. It's very confusing what happened. I'm trying to figure out, and this is the problem with anything that goes on with Russia. Who knows what is actually going on there? Was this a case where Pregozhin thinks he could just get away with overthrowing the Russian government? And why would he think that? Did he think that elements of the Russian army, perhaps a a large portion of them would come back over to his side, and along with the Russian army, Wagner would just go in and oust Shoigu and Gerasimov. And what would he do? Make himself defense minister? It's super weird. Why would he do this unless he knew that he had a large portion of the army on his side? And then, of course, after he took over the Southern Military District headquarters in Rostov, apparently Belarusian President Lukashenko made a deal with him, with Putin's agreement, apparently, that Prigozhin would head off to Belarus and go off into exile. Wagner PMC would be taken over by the Russian military, I guess. And some reports have the deal being that Shoigu and Gerasimov will be, forced to retire and replaced. I don't know. If I was going to go into exile, the one place I wouldn't want to go is Belarus, because Belarus is basically a puppet state of Russia. I'd stay away from Windows if I was Yevgeny Progozhin for ever, because Vladimir Putin, and that's the other thing. While this was going on, Vladimir Putin made a speech 14 hours after it had all started. I mean, it was basically the next day, where he basically vowed that these people would all face horrible, horrible justice. And in Russia, facing justice generally means having to pay the secret police a quarter for the cost of the bullet they're going to put in the back of your head. That didn't happen either. So, I don't know. I mean, I know what Vladimir Putin wants. He wants to stay in power. He wants to run the country. But how badly does this damage him? One of the reasons that Vladimir Putin has been able to stay in power for so long is this aura of inevitability that he has around him. Who else is going to take over? Who else could possibly take over? Indeed, who could even launch an attempt to overthrow Vladimir Putin? Well, we got a good idea. Vladimir Putin then comes out and says he's going to destroy Wagner and Pregozhin, and they're all going to be charged with horrific crimes and, of course, probably executed. And that didn't happen either. Now there's this deal. So Pregozhin looks weak because he couldn't accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. Putin looks weaker now because this actually happened, and the way out of it was to make a deal that lets Pregozhin, at least putatively in the short term, off the hook. Again, if I was Yevgeny Progozhin, stay away from Windows, especially, anywhere above the 4th or 5th floor. That seems to be Vladimir Putin's favorite way of getting rid of people. So it's very confusing. There's a lot of analysis that you're going to see and hear and read, including my analysis, which is basically worthless, because really the only people who know what went on with this, why it was kicked off, what was going on, are the principals involved. And anyone outside of Russia who tells you that they have the inside scoop on what's going on is probably just wrong. One of the troubles with Russia is that, as Winston Churchill once put it, it is a mystery wrapped inside a riddle, wrapped inside an enigma. It's like one of those little Russian dolls, that are all nested, and there's like 50 dolls all nested inside each other. Trying to look from the outside and figure out what's going on in Russia is very, very difficult to do. So I don't know that anybody has a good analysis of this. I would think, if I was Pregozhin, that I would have, or at least I would want to have, enough military forces on my side, not just Wagner guys, but Russian military forces who would take over. And it's not unbelievable to think that that might have happened. There are reports that Russian military units came over to his side. One of the interesting things about running a regime like Putin's is that your top leadership, all of your senior generals, tend to be chosen for their loyalty to the regime and not from their competence as military leaders. Wait a second. I went through all of that and I'm muted. You know what we're going to do? I've been talking for 9 minutes and we're muted. So great. This has been a waste of a podcast, but you know what we're going to do? Oh, and by the way, Michael is with us now. Michael does not have his virtual camera turned on in OBS. So all I'm seeing is the OBS logo. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to backtrack. I'm going to turn this on. Look at this. We're going to go right back here to the Observations podcast for 23 June. And we are, oh, wait a second. Oh, no. Michael, I have bad news for you. I was only muted on Zoom. I wasn't muted in the podcast. So, hey, the podcast was working. So, great. Thank you, inebriated Plutarch, for telling me that. No, Michael, I cannot see you on the screen, because if you go into OBS, your Start Virtual Camera button should be clicked so that it broadcasts. Because I'm getting the OBS logo, what I'm not getting is your image. So anyway, while Michael works on getting a picture up, let me go back to this. So as I was saying, if you have a regime like Putin's and you're promoting people to general for political reliability and not for competence, what that tends to create at the field grade officer level, so major through lieutenant colonel, is a bunch of competent guys who think they should have been promoted and who weren't because for whatever reason they weren't believed to be as politically reliable as the people who did get promoted. And that tends to cause a lot of resentment. And so if you're a guy like Yevgeny Progozhin and you decide that you want to take off against the government, you know what you might do is recruit a whole bunch of these lieutenant colonels and colonels. Now, here's the thing. The reason they're called field grade officers is that they are the people who actually command troops in the field. When you're a general, you don't really directly command troops in the field. You don't have your own unit. I mean, you have a headquarters unit, but other than that, the actual commanders of your brigades and your battalions and your companies are all captains through colonels. They're the people who actually drive the car for the troops in the field. If you can get a whole bunch of guys like that on your side, then maybe you can overthrow the government. Otherwise, you wouldn't start it. I got to assume that he felt he would get a whole bunch of these guys on his side because perhaps he sounded out people like colonels and lieutenant colonels about Shoigu and Gerasimov, and they all thought, yeah, they're a bunch of incompetent buffoons. They're a bunch of Putin lackeys. And maybe he thought that, that would be enough for him to turn the tide. And then that didn't happen, or at least not enough of them came over to his side, probably a lot of them. Because again, one of the troubles about being a military commander in a totalitarian dictatorship, which Russia is not quite as totalitarian as the Soviet Union, but it's got a pretty iron grip on power. There's Michael. He's live now. So you figured it out. So I guess he didn't get enough people on his side for it to work, and he decided he had better give up. However, on the other side, Putin had to have been relatively panicky about the fact that he made it to Rostov, took over Southern Military District Headquarters, and was heading up to Moscow. So both of them end up coming out of this looking like strongmen.
Mercenary. He's going to go to wherever he gets paid the most. So I have to believe that what's his face from Belarus,
Lukashenko
gave him a better deal. I mean, that's the only thing that makes any sense to me. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows.
I don't know that Lukashenko can protect him ultimately.
Well, I don't think he has to worry about protecting him. I think Wagner Group can take care of of themselves. Um, the real question is what's going to happen to Putin,
Oh yeah, because
right?
because this aura of inevitability and invincibility is now gone. We know that he can
Right.
be threatened. We know that it might be possible to overthrow this guy. And I say by we, I mean anyone in Russia who might have an inkling that this is something they would want to do.
And it has been this isn't something new. This has been boiling for a while. So it's not a, you know, it's not a out of the blue thing. Um, Ukraine for the Russians has not been going well. Um, Morale is way down. We talked about this however many weeks ago it was, but I mean, this has been a known problem. Prigozhin pulling this stunt kind of, I think, puts the exclamation point on just how dissatisfied Russians are with how because let's be honest. I mean, Prigozhin would be happy to take over Ukraine.
Oh yeah, I mean, in the Prigozhin versus Putin continuum, Prigozhin
Right.
is the hardliner. You know, as hard
Yeah,
as that is to
that's
believe,
absolutely right.
Prigozhin thinks that Vladimir Putin is some dovish pussy who isn't getting it done.
Yeah. So this isn't some sort of peacenik that who's like rebelling against war. Um, like a lot of Russians that we're now finding out, it's been hard to get any kind of real read on them. Um, we're starting to find out that like, what is this adventurism in Ukraine? Like, do we really need to do this? And he called their bluff, uh, and they did. I mean, Putin absolutely lied, and his generals lied about getting into this thing. I mean,
Well,
not the first time that's ever
but
happened.
see, here's the problem for every possible Russian person in the Russian leadership, because I think when you say what Russians want, I think that's largely irrelevant because nobody at the governing level gives a shit what Russians want.
True.
So, but when you talk about the government circles, I think for everybody who says maybe this Ukraine thing was a mistake, there is another one or two people who think we haven't gone far enough in Ukraine. We haven't been brutal enough and taken over enough of the country or competent
Well,
enough or
certainly
whatever it is.
Shoigu thinks that, and who's the other?
Gerasimov.
Yeah, Gerasimov. They certainly think that. I mean, I don't know what Putin thinks, to be honest. I mean, I it's hard to put him on any real solid ground because I think he just goes with what will work for him at the time.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think Putin's primary consideration is what keeps me in power.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's been 23 years. He's obviously done a good job of that.
And the only guy that's been in power for longer is Lukashenko.
Well, and the funny thing is that Lukashenko is like a nobody. I mean, he really has nothing. And I really think that getting the Wagner Group over to Belarus was his desire to actually be a power player. I think he's kind of tired of being a nobody.
Yeah, but here's the problem. You bring Wagner Group, who are loyal to Yevgeny Progozhin, to
Right,
Belarus. And if Yevgeny Prigozhin says, you know what, I think I'd like to be president of Belarus,
right,
the Belarusian army's not going to stop him because they're a bunch of incompetent buffoons.
right.
So if he wants, I mean, is this some, It's Russia.
No, it's
Russia.
It's absolutely inviting the fox into the henhouse.
And since it is Russia, is this part of some plan that Vladimir Putin wants Prigozhin in Belarus to take over the government of Belarus because Lukashenko didn't put the Belarusian army into the invasion of Ukraine, and this is a way to get Belarus involved? Because as crazy as that sounds, it's Russia. It could be true.
Yeah, I mean, there's no definitive way to say that that's not true. Because, I mean, this is like old school politics. Like, we're talking like, Metternich and like, I mean, this is like old school rivalries and how to like maneuver. I mean, this is what Russia is, and their outer oblasts.
I tell you what has been really interesting to watch are the Russian analysts who, a week ago were saying Russia is just tearing up Ukraine, and then 2 nights ago we're saying, well, I guess I'll go to bed to see if there's a Russia in the morning, and then 24 hours later, well, of course, Pregozhin could not pull this off. Who would have ever thought so? The number of people, especially the number of people who became Russian specialists after spending a week as submersible and deep sea diving specialists on social media, has just been fascinating.
And I mean, that's Twitter for you.
Yeah, and I'm the first to say I am not a specialist in this area, and anybody who isn't in Russia or who doesn't have direct contact with people in the Russian leadership, they don't know what's going on either.
Yeah, I mean, our knowledge is mostly based on historical circumstances, right? And we have some knowledge of, the military and its capabilities, which have become clearer with this Ukrainian nonsense. But other than that, no. I mean, you have to be on the ground in Russia.
Yeah, and I don't think
there
anybody.
Are some people there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody outside the principles actually knows. And by the way, you can't trust a word that either Putin or Prigozhin says because they're both liars.
Yeah, absolutely, that's right.
It's like there is nobody who is saying anything about this that can be trusted, either because they don't know what's going on, or B, because they do know what's going on and they're probably lying to us.
Yeah, I mean, they got a safe face, right?
Yeah. So I guess we're just going to learn all about this after the fact. I guess maybe in 60 or 90 days when Pregozhin falls out of the 23rd story hotel room that he's got in the capital of Belarus, then we'll know, oh, okay, now we know what happened. Because that seems to be Vladimir Putin's favorite way of getting rid of people. But
either way, it like there's nothing that's good that's kind of the only good thing that's kind of come out of this is the invasion of Ukraine is done. Russia can't pull it off now.
Well, I think if you're going to have to pull Wagner, you've got a choice. Either you pull Wagner out completely, which you lose 2 or 3 divisions of troops. I think some were saying that Wagner had up to 50,000 people. Okay, 50,000 people divided by 15, that gives you about 4 divisions and some support elements. Let's say 3 divisions, maybe 2 divisions of frontline combat. But anyway, they're gone. So those 2 divisions, all their support is gone. I don't know how Russia makes that up, at least in the short term, without, again, another round of conscription. So either they take these guys over and they just absorb them into the Russian military and force them to fight. How reliable they are, I don't know.
See that happening. I mean, how are they going to do it?
Or
the problem is that they don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the ability to make these things happen. They can't force this issue, and the Russians simply are outgunned, outmanned,
Well, not outmanned.
to a certain extent.
Outgunned, sure.
Yeah, to a
Outmanned,
certain extent.
no. I mean, if the Russians really wanted to do
They have
this,
lots of, but are they really soldiers? I mean, the people they're pulling in, yeah, they have some numbers, but they're not trained and they're not competent.
yeah. Well,
And
as Joseph Stalin once said, numbers have a quality of their own. When it comes right down to it, Russia has 10 to 12 times the manpower reserves that the Ukrainians could ever
I mean,
hope
they
to have.
have what, like a 5 million, 6 million man army if you include like the police and everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, if Russia really wanted to, they could probably win. The trouble is, and this has been historically true of Russia, every war that Russia has fought has, even the ones that they have won, have been unmitigated disasters. And certainly at the first part of every war,
Bloodbaths.
yeah, and certainly at the first part of every war, even the wars Russia has won, they've taken enormous casualties, and that appears to be the case here. You know, people talk about Russia as being a very powerful state and having, well, it used to have what was comparatively endless manpower in the 19th and early 20th centuries. That's no longer true. Russia is about 2/3 the size and population of the United States at this point. So if you want to talk about manpower reserves, they're not there the way that they were back in the good old days. But everybody talks about Russia as being so advanced and so powerful, and every time Russia gets into combat, it turns into an absolute disaster. Sure, they eventually beat the Germans, but not one notes
Not
without
alone.
help. So I guess we'll just have to watch it. It's sure made for an interesting Friday night and Saturday.
Yeah.
And, you know, here's the thing. Let's say he had gone to Moscow. Let's say Putin gets overthrown. I think we need to be really careful about wishing that Putin would go. Sure, it would be great if Putin would go and some liberal democratic government.
Prigozhin is no
Yeah,
basket of goodies.
Yeah, Prigozhin ain't that. And it's hard to see who might take over from Putin that would be from a Western sense and from a sense of being less dictatorial in his own country. It's hard to see who the candidates would be for a more liberal Russian government.
Yeah, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it seems to me any
Prigozhin
replacement
is a
of Putin would
mercenary.
be worse.
Yeah, I mean, Prigozhin is a mercenary. So, with any control at all over nuclear warheads, who knows what he'd do? Would he sell them? You know, I mean, it's it's like a James Bond
Yeah, and by the way, this should tell you,
scenario, right?
by the way, Prigozhin is a perfect example of how weird Russia is, right? Here is a guy who was a criminal and went to prison.
As are the Wagner Group in general.
Exactly. Went to prison for 9 years at the end of the Soviet Union for theft and what have you. Apparently learned to cook, got out, started catering, somehow was able to cook something for Vladimir Putin, who just thought it was delish. So he got a whole bunch of catering contracts from the Russian government and became wealthy as a professional government contract caterer. And then in 2014 becomes the head of a private military contractor. I'm not sure where his cooking experience feeds into running his own army, but I can't imagine a caterer just having his own private army in almost any other country in the world outside of Russia.
Sope.
Yeah. Bam! Now I have guns. Isn't that spicy? So anyway, that's over. We'll see what the actual end result
Isn't
of this.
it weird though how quickly that all just like flipped? Like they were on their way to Moscow.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and they were probably going to be able to take Moscow. They were picking up allies along the way. They had, troops saying, "Hey, you know what? We're going to follow you." There was a third largest political party in parliament said, "We're backing Pregozhin," and all of a sudden it was just like, "We're going to stop."
Look,
Like, what?
one of three things happened. Something didn't happen that
He got paid
Prigozhin.
off. He got paid off.
Something didn't happen that Prigozhin expected to happen. Something happened that he didn't expect to happen, or this was, well, actually four things. A, this was prearranged. And so there is some sort of deep psyop game going on that we can't figure out because we're not Russians and thus not crazy enough to figure out how that psyop would work. Or four, he just got paid off and they said, look, here's $500 million.
I think he had to get paid off. I mean, he's a mercenary. I mean, he's going to go where the money is. And he's apparently very good at finding the money.
Yeah, well, if I was going to go into exile, I would request Switzerland, not Belarus.
Not Belarus.
I mean, assuming Switzerland would even take him, but yeah, sure. Anyway.
I mean, Lukashenko is well, I mean, he wants to be as much of a hard ass as Putin, but he doesn't have the wherewithal. He doesn't have the means.
Yeah, he doesn't have, he has a lot of power in Belarus,
but other than that, yeah, he can't project it.
Yeah, so we'll have to watch that. Another interesting...
It's going to be interesting. It looked like all of a sudden there was going to be another Russian Revolution, which would not have turned out well. Not like the first one did.
Well, the first one didn't turn out well either. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
You know what? By the way, you know what's fascinating about this? Speaking about the Russian Revolution, and I mentioned this to Chris, and I've been studying about World War I sort of academically over the past couple of weeks, and it's amazing how much culturally, certainly in Russia, World War I still matters. Because Vladimir Putin brought up...
that was the beginning of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. I mean, we don't think about World War I much, and it was 100 and some years ago. Who cares? It doesn't mean anything. That's not true. It still has a lot of resonance, certainly culturally, and certainly in Russia, because it changed the entire course of modern Russian history. So, anyway, we'll see what happens there. I actually want to move on to something that happened over here that I think we can all understand quite a lot better. And that is, and I have you turned off in Zoom, so let me turn you back on there, Michael. That is the whistleblower testimony that we heard in the House this week. And before we get into the whistleblower testimony, which I think was in many ways explosive, and I have a specific question that I want to answer, although that I'd like to ask you, although I think I already know the answer. These allegations have become incendiary enough that even the mainstream media is not hiding them anymore. So Politico, CNN, obviously Fox News and the New York Post, but The Hill covering them, even Accounting Today, of all news sources, covering this whistleblower testimony from a couple of IRS guys that were charged with the investigation of Hunter Biden. And the way that the House came up with it is the DOJ basically engaged in three tactics: delay, divulge, and deny. It's the divulge one that I have a question about. So every time investigators wanted to do anything, somebody, largely U.S. Attorney Lesley Wolf at the DOJ, was just saying, no, we can't do that. We can't give you search warrants. This is just not going to happen. No. You guys got to hold up on this and hold up on that. Then there was the, denying request for prosecution. So apparently, David Weiss, who is the U.S. Attorney for Delaware, he tried to charge Hunter Biden in D.C. They said no. He tried to charge them in Central California. They said no. When they finally did say yes, it was on this plea deal, which Hunter Biden gets away with, basically a slap on the wrist.
He also asked for special.
Yeah, he also asked for special counsel approval, which was also denied. And then there was this one, this divulge one. So according to, I guess, one of the whistleblowers, I think Shapley is the guy's name, he says
Yeah.
that they had probable cause to
Oh,
believe
yeah,
that
yeah,
there
yeah,
was
yeah.
evidence in a storage unit in Northern Virginia. And
Right.
they asked for permission to search. And again, Lesley Wolf, and I don't know, she's U.S. Attorney Lesley Wolf, which I guess is higher than
I
an,
think she's actually assistant USA.
yeah. Uh, anyway, she says, no, you can't do that. And then when they said, okay, well, when can we do it? And they were apparently told you got to wait 30 days before you can do this. And then in the interim, he says that Lesley Wolf called Hunter Biden's attorneys and told them about the search warrant and the storage unit.
Right.
Now, my question is, how is that not black letter obstruction of justice?
I mean, that's a really good question. I can't say with any certainty because the uh, the elements of that are particular, and I don't know if they were all fulfilled. Um, it certainly smells exactly what you're saying. That this was obstruction of justice, and it is not. Uh, it, there are ethical problems professionally with tipping off uh, the other side. That's problematic. I can't say for certain that there is an actual legal issue there, like you suggested, of obstructing justice. But
Well,
I think that
like
you
you,
you could make a case.
yeah, I mean, like you, I don't know what the specific elements are for obstruction of justice, but it seems to me
Yeah,
if there is an ongoing investigation and one of your subordinates says, hey, we think there's evidence in this locker, and you go, oh, okay, well, you need to hold off on that. Then you pick up the phone and you call the subject of an investigation's attorney and say, basically, we think there's evidence in this storage unit. Have a good day. I mean, maybe the element is you have to say, you have to go and remove that evidence now. And if you don't say those specific words, maybe that's not obstruction of justice. But as far as I'm concerned, it looks, quacks, and flies like a duck.
the problem is that obstruction of justice is rather narrowly defined, and matter of fact, maybe we should look it up. But the coming from the prosecution side, I think it's a little bit more difficult. So I think that there's you expect a obstruction coming from the
The
defendant,
defense, yes.
and right. So
Well,
getting it
how are you not
from
working
the
effective?
prosecutor.
Yeah, how are you? Well, first of all, she's not the prosecutor. That's the problem. She
Well,
is
that's true. Yeah,
at
no,
the
good point.
DOJ. She's not the prosecutor. She may be above the prosecutor in the DOJ chain of command, but he is the
Yeah,
U.S.
yeah.
Attorney for Delaware. This is his investigation, not hers. So if she's butting her nose in his investigation, is she not, in effect, acting as a defense attorney for the defendant?
See, now I think that's more of an ethical issue than an obstruction of justice issue. Again, I haven't looked at that statute for a very long time. Um, so I don't know that it would necessarily apply to her. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm just saying that I don't know that it would necessarily apply to her. But ethically, yeah, that's a serious issue. That's something that really should get you disbarred, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Now, will any of that happen? I guess
Of course not.
the more, well, see, that's the problem. we've already decided that
Well,
nobody's
that
going to pay.
and you know, and so the Durham uh, his testimony before Congress, one of the things that he said quite explicitly is that, this isn't a matter of us like putting in, better rules and procedures or anything like that. Like, there needs to be accountability, and nobody's being held accountable. And that's absolutely correct. I mean, that is the number one problem with our justice system, is that people are not held accountable when they're guilty as sin.
In the best of all possible worlds, this whistleblower testimony, coming as it does in the same week that the House voted to investigate creating impeachment articles against Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Seems to me that this ought to be part of that proceeding.
I agree.
Absolutely. We now need to subpoena these whistleblowers, one of whom, by the way, is unnamed. So we don't know who that is yet. We do know who Shapley is. At least we know his name. I have no idea who he is. So it seems to me that you've got to get those two whistleblowers there. You have got to get Lesley Wolf. You've got to get David Weiss. All of those people.
I think David Weiss would be probably the primo one that you really need. Given the testimony we already have, David Weiss is the one at the front line of all this. And it's him that needs to say, yeah, I did try to get special counsel. Yes, I was not allowed to bring a case in D.C. I was not allowed to bring a case in California. He needs to be the one to say that.
Oh, and by the way, one of the whistleblowers also said Merrick Garland's testimony to Congress last month was a lie.
Yeah.
Where he said, no, the DOJ is not interfering in this stuff at all. According to these whistleblowers, the DOJ is in fact doing that. So either Merrick Garland doesn't know what's going on in the DOJ, or he lied to Congress. Yeah.
Give me a break.
Well, again, or he lied to Congress.
He absolutely lied to Congress. I mean, it was, and look, if you're a Democrat, lying to Congress means nothing. What Democrat has ever been prosecuted or even, received any consequences at all for lying to Congress?
Yes, remember Obama's attorney general was cited for contempt.
That guy should have been in jail.
And nothing ever happened. Eric Holder.
I can't stand him.
It is difficult to see any Democrat. Although Congress, of course, the House, run by Republicans by a bare vote, did manage to censure Adam Schiff this week on a strictly party line vote. But they managed to do that. Of course, censure in the House is basically saying you've been a bad boy and you should be ashamed. Yeah, exactly. That's as much as you get out of it. Naughty, naughty, naughty. But this now, I don't see how this does not have the Judiciary Committee now begin to run a round of Watergate hearings. The question, of course, is still outstanding. Merrick Garland maybe knew. Lesley Wolf maybe interfered. David Weiss got shut down for everything he tried to do. That certainly has to be investigated. Somebody has to pay for that. Somebody. If these whistleblower allegations are true, they're explosive. People need to go to jail. But you get back to the question that was being asked in 1973 of Richard Nixon. What did the president know, and when did he know it? Because there is a distance between Joe Biden calling up the DOJ and saying, hey, take care of my son Hunter, and people at the DOJ thinking to themselves, we got to get rid of this Hunter thing because it makes the president look bad. And even in Watergate, if it hadn't been for the tapes, it would have all ended with Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and Dean being fired, and Richard Nixon would have been president till 1976.
Right.
We had to find that smoking gun. So far, we've got a DOJ that basically needs to be torn down brick by brick, the earth salted so that nothing ever grows there again, and then we need to build an entirely new federal investigative prosecutorial system because the one we clearly have is broken. That doesn't get us to the White House.
Quite a long. Actually, the FBI has been around a lot less longer than the United States has. Like, we used to actually have, Treasury men and G men and whatever. We didn't have an FBI. Each one of the agencies that were in charge of something serious had their own investigative units, and they would bring it straight to the DOJ.
Yeah, well, I think the FBI came along, what was it, 1911? And it was just a bunch of hacks and losers.
Was it that in 19? Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was a bunch of hacks in 1911, but it wasn't anything until like the 20s or 30s.
Yeah, when they finally put J. Edgar Hoover in charge of it.
Mm-hmm.
He made it initially into a law enforcement organization and then into a nationwide spying organization on American citizens. And that's the weird thing. Merrick Garland came out this week and said, look, these people are talking about the FBI and the Department of Justice, and they're criticizing it. I mean, they're damaging something that is essential to democracy.
Could you believe that?
No.
What a self-serving fucking asshole.
The ability to criticize you is essential to a functioning democracy. Your agency is just a government agency. It's full of a bunch of government hacks and time servers, and we can criticize anything we want about it. If we can't, we don't live in a free society.
And he's one of them. He has been on the public dole for like 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
Merrick Garland, thank God he is not. Mitch...
Say what you want about Mitch McConnell, but
he kept that guy off the Supreme Court.
Mitch McConnell torpedoed his nomination to the Supreme Court. I mean,
Cocaine Mitch.
Yeah, we can. I mean, there's plenty of things that you can say bad about Mitch McConnell, and practically everybody does. But at least he kept this son of a bitch off the Supreme Court.
I mean, think about it. This guy was sold as some sort of moderate,
middle of the road.
No, he is a Washington insider, a fucking Democrat crony. I mean, he's absolutely awful. I mean, absolutely awful. And a terrible liar. I mean, it's just so obvious. I love watching him get interrogated in front of like the Senate or the House, and he's just so nervous. Like, you can see it's like I know you're lying, man. I can see it. You're full of shit.
Yeah, well, he's a sketchy looking fella whenever it comes to these testimonies, but
he's just awful.
If this all just blows over, which everything else has, then I think we have to come to the conclusion that there is nothing.
The conclusion we came to 10
years ago. There's nothing reformable about the system. It can't be reformed. Right. And I don't even know at this point how you would just shut it all down, tear it all apart, disband the FBI, and rebuild it. With who? The people that you just fired? What does that accomplish other than a change of name?
Right? I mean, how do you can't find like a whole new crew. That's not going to work. You need people with actual experience. And it's a tough job. I mean, being involved in law enforcement is actually a really, really, especially at that level, you need to know a hell of a lot. You have to have a certain minimum acumen for the law, people's rights. I mean, it's a tough job. It's a very tough job. So
Not, I hasten to say,
throwing trees.
Not, I hasten to say that the FBI has been overly concerned with people's rights in the past.
Well, sure, but at the same time, if you want a competent and you know, an actual FBI that can do its job and do it well, you do need those sort of people. And there are plenty of people in the FBI who are that way. But unfortunately, it's the people who run the FBI that fuck it all up. It's become politicized, and it's become a fiefdom.
Yeah, well, it certainly looks that way. I don't know how to reform it. Congress has to, and this is the problem. Congress's one tool is impeachment, right? I mean, Congress can impeach any of these guys.
Which is useless.
And it's useless.
We know that it's useless.
Because nobody will ever get convicted.
Been successfully impeached.
No, I mean, even Andrew Johnson, who you would think would have been a shoo-in for being convicted and thrown out of office in 1866 or 67. The Republicans ran the country like their own personal dog kennel at that point, and they couldn't get him tossed out of office. So
yeah,
I think the last person who was impeached and removed from office was Alcee Hastings when he was a federal judge for taking bribes. And then he
came back and became, he was impeached as a judge and then came back and won a seat in Congress.
Yes, that's correct.
So it's like, okay.
But look, Alcee Hastings' impeachment was 30 years ago. And he was a nobody.
Was it that long ago?
Yeah, he was a nobody.
It was like early 90s, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he was a nobody. He was just a federal district court judge. And they,
in like Florida, right?
Yeah, and they tossed him out. And that's the last time it's worked. The idea that you can take, especially when you look at the Democrats, like look, it is undeniable that Adam Schiff just lied outright about this Russia collusion stuff. All this evidence that he said he had and that he had seen, that it was a slam dunk and all that.
I mean, that's not illegal.
It's not illegal. It's not illegal, but it was a lie. It was a party line vote on his censure. Not a single Democrat voted to censure him for
they
lying.
Clapped for him.
Yeah, they spent 10 minutes in the well of the House yelling, shame, 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 because, of course, Game of Thrones, because that's their fucking connection with reality, a dark fantasy. You'll never get Merrick Garland impeached. I mean,
no, as a matter of fact, you can't get any Democrat impeached. Well, no, you can get him impeached, but you can't
get him impeached. You can't get him convicted. But on the other hand, they had two shots at Trump and couldn't get him convicted either. So,
and there were a lot of anti-Trumpers in the Senate, and they still couldn't do it.
Yeah. So,
but it does take 60 votes.
Yeah, it takes a 2/3 vote of the Senate. 2/3 of the Senate at this in a 50-50 Senate, 2/3 of the Senate aren't going to agree on anything.
No, not at all.
So Congress doesn't really have the power to hold anybody accountable. I mean, they can impeach them, and then they won't get convicted. They won't get convicted in the Senate.
I mean, that the biggest problem is that even if the DOJ would take the referral and prosecute it, they're going to prosecute it in D.C. D.C. is not going to convict. We've already seen this with the Durham stuff, right? What's his face from the lawyer for Hillary Clinton? He got off scot-free, even though he absolutely lied to the FBI. It was like there really wasn't any question. They're like, well, but he didn't really mean it that way.
And besides, it was against Trump anyway, so who cares?
Right, exactly.
All in a good cause, right?
You cannot get a fair trial with these sorts of cohorts. And, I mean, it is what it is.
I am increasingly attracted to the idea of taking all of the executive departments out of Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Well, and that's what so DeSantis has talked about this, and I agree with it, 100%. Um, I don't know if any of the others have. Ramaswamy might have as well, but yeah, no. Like, why is the Farm Bureau in D.C.? Why isn't in the? It should be in the middle of fucking Iowa.
Seems like, or actually, if you want to put it in the middle, it seems like it should be somewhere in Kansas, like Salinas, Kansas. The Department of the Interior should be in Kalispell, Montana.
Right?
Put these jobs in places that people don't want to go. Get it out of Northern
And
Virginia.
where they actually have a purview over like something local, you know, instead of running it out of Washington.
But of course, I don't see how that solves this problem, because if you just transfer all of those people out to, say, Kalispell, Montana, Kalispell then becomes a tiny little DC in the middle of Montana. And nobody in Kalispell.
It's going to be a little bit harder to do that there.
Well, it would be hard to move a couple of 100,000 bureaucrats out of Washington, D.C. to Kalispell, Montana. That is
and
true.
Very few people are going to want to go there.
That's true.
Although the cost of living would be a lot better.
You would think so, but you
for
would
a time.
you would think so, but you would actually be wrong. Go to Montana and look at Wyoming, and look at what houses cost out there now. You know, so many people, especially rich people, have left California or New York and have moved out to frickin' Montana to Great Falls. I mean, it's probably cheaper for me to buy a house here in San Diego than it would be for me to buy a house in Great Falls, Montana at this point.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, people have been going out there and just buying up all of the land and paying top dollar.
So I can tell
for
you
it.
this, that just north of Salt Lake City, my company that I work for, not my company, I don't own it, but the company I work for we're negotiating a lease, and I was shocked at how high the rent per square feet was. It's like closing in on $40 a square foot. That's high. I mean, that's in San Diego itself. I think we pay like 36, 37.
Yeah, and by the way, with the occupancy rates we have, I don't even see how that's a justifiable rate.
I don't get it. I really don't get it.
You know, the occupancy rate in New York City now of commercial real estate is down to 60%.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what happened with all the COVID stuff, and everybody's working from home, and like, yeah, I'd like to stay at home.
Yeah, I haven't walked inside an office since
and we're finding
February
that
of 2020 February of 2020 was the last time I went into an office.
Yeah. And we're finding that you get just as much productivity and actually probably a little more, because people actually work longer hours because they're not having to travel.
Yeah, there's some argument about that. There was a big article this past week about the horrible price we're paying for people working from home. Well, I don't know who's paying the horrible price. What I do know is that it's not me in gas, wear and tear on my motorcycle, time, commuting. All of that is gone. I can now get up at the crack of 9 and be sitting in front of my desk at the opening of business.
And you might work a little bit longer because you don't have to go home. You don't have to commute. So you might like hang out for another half an hour or so. And a lot of people are doing that. Yeah,
because I'm just sitting in my home office with, my cold drink in front of my computer. If I got to sit here for another dinner's probably not even ready yet, right? So I'll just put in a little extra time. Not that it matters. I'm salaried. It doesn't matter how long I work. Nobody cares.
No, but when we're talking about productivity, I mean, if you spend a little extra time and you don't have to leave your house, you're already home. I mean, that's like it nudges. I mean, it's minimal. I mean, I understand that.
Look, even if it's only the 15 minutes a day at the beginning and end of the day, when I first walked into the office and I got to turn everything
if you take
on
a
and
call
say hi to
like
people.
5:30.
Yeah, or 15 minutes before, I throw away my trash or, go clean out my coffee cup in the sink. I mean, that first 15 and last 15 minutes are non-productive anyway. If I'm sitting at home, I'm probably working during those 2 15-minute time periods. That's an extra half hour
I'll tell
right
you, Bob,
there.
I go to my desk and I stare at the computer screen for about 40 minutes.
It looks like I'm busy, but so I don't know what to do about all of this whistleblower stuff. What I do know is that there should be massive investigations. And who knows, maybe it hooks this Hunter Biden stuff. I guess one of the reasons why I'm so keen on it. And I don't know why I want this so badly, because I know that the replacements are going to be god awful, but I want Joe Biden thrown out of office. I really do want to have him either.
I don't think he is going to be on the ticket. I'm pretty convinced that they are going to find a reason to put him out to pasture. They're going to do a primary, and they're going to try to get Gavin Newsom.
Well, here's the thing. At least it's given us this. At least it's given us CNN, Politico. They're at least talking about it now.
That's what I mean.
And they've refused to cover it.
They're talking about it. I think Biden's on the way out.
Yeah. So does that mean that they've decided Joe is just a non-starter? Because like we talked about last week, we are now facing an election where all things as they are right now, no guarantee that will happen. We have 2 presidential candidates that are about to be presented to us, neither of which, or rather both of which, a majority of Americans do not want to run for president.
Yeah.
A majority of Americans do not want Joe Biden to run for another term. A majority of Americans don't want Donald Trump to run for a second term. So I think it's a pretty big indictment.
Yeah, it's all voting against the other guy.
Yeah, it's a pretty big.
Voting for somebody. It's voting against somebody.
No, it's a huge indictment of our political system that it has devolved into a system where for the last, and look, this is true of 2016. It was true of 2020. Yeah. The last 3 elections, well, the last 2 elections and coming up to a 3rd election have been referendums on who do we not want the most? What is the lesser of 2 evils? Right.
Absolutely true. Yeah, no, there's not a lot of voting for. It's really voting against. And that's, I think it's just the reality we have.
Who am I going to hold?
We've had for a while.
Who am I going to hold my nose and vote for this time?
Yeah. I mean,
that's not.
I did that with Trump.
Yeah, that's not a sustainable system. It just isn't.
No.
But I would like.
And we're seeing it break down.
But I would like to see Biden. I would like to see Biden resign because I think the man is a crook. I think that I think he's always been a crook. He has been wrong about certainly every foreign policy decision that he has come out on side of. Yeah, Bob Gates been wrong about every foreign policy decision for the last 50 years. Joe Biden is incompetent. He is an idiot. Yeah. He always has been, and he doesn't need to be president.
Even when he was like Campos Mentos. I mean, he actually.
Yeah, I thought we had disposed of. I thought we disposed of his presidential aspirations in 1988.
I absolutely agree with you. Once that whole plagiarism thing came out.
Yeah, so I have always despised Joe Biden. I can't believe he's president. I'd like him thrown out. And Nixon didn't know about Watergate. He didn't know about anything. He got drawn into it. And it took 2 years from the summer of 72 until the summer of 74, really, to be able to point a finger at something Richard Nixon had done. Of course, impeachment voted on by the House. He then resigned to avoid an impeachment trial.
He did name his election committee creep.
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to see nothing more than that to happen to Joe Biden. Now, I am aware that should that happen to Joe Biden, we will be left, at least in the interim, with President Kamala Harris.
God.
And
she might even be stupider.
Yeah,
and without
she
the excuses.
Or as I refer to her, Joe Biden's insurance, because
oh my God.
If you think I'm bad, imagine this moron.
This is what we said about Joe Biden with Obama. It's like, no, we don't want to get rid of Obama because Biden will then become president.
Yeah, and now we have devolved to having Biden as president. We don't want to get rid of him because that means Kamala Harris becomes president.
Oh my God, she's an idiot.
Yeah, I look at his age. I can't believe he wants to run again.
I don't think he does. Well, no,
I think he does. I think this is his hunger.
Prestige.
Yeah, I think this is his hunger for power. He does not want to let it go. This is what he has been trying to do in Washington, D.C. since the 1980s.
For 30 some years.
He has finally accomplished his goal. He was president of the United States. And it'd be great if he gets elected to a second term. I think he's far too old. And look, even when he was in his prime, a prime that prompted his fellow senators to nickname him Slow Joe Biden. Even in his prime, he wasn't smart enough to be president, and he is not in his prime. I'd like him to go. Of course, Kamala Harris is even worse. But he's going to have to be forced out. So it's either going to have to be something health-wise or something else that just makes him untenable as a candidate.
I mean, so we have these whistleblowers and all this other stuff. The stench is getting stronger. The House is pushing this stuff. I think the Democrats are going to, and well, like you said, I mean, all of a sudden, like Politico, I expect the New York Times to jump in on this.
CNN, The Hill, the New York Times has jumped in, yes.
So I think that's the sign that, okay, Joe, you need to step aside. Will it happen? I don't know. I mean, he is an idiot. And I think that Jill Biden is the one kind of running the show. It's her megalomania that I think is driving this.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about her. There is sort of a divide of opinion as to whether she's some sort of Svengali who is, orchestrating all of this, or
Svengali.
Yeah.
Svengali was actually smart.
Yes, he was actually talented. But he did orchestrate things. So I don't know. I think most of the problem is Joe. I think he wants to be president so bad.
I think that's right.
I'm sure she's happy that he is president, but I would like them both to go back to Delaware at the earliest possible opportunity.
I agree.
And look, honestly, if even part of this Hunter Biden stuff is true, because this IRS whistleblower thing, that's only part of the picture we've been getting over the past couple of weeks. We now have these shell companies that you and I talked about last month, and these weird payments that are being made. This Telegram message that got publicized, and by the way, Hunter Biden's lawyer effectively
admitted that
validated it as being true.
Right.
Of Hunter Biden saying, look, I'm sitting right here next to my father. Why are you not fulfilling your commitment to give me a call?
And then we know for a fact.
A couple of days later, $5.1 million. So, I mean,
not for the big guy.
Yeah, these events seem to be very closely co-located in time. So I think there is a path, and some people have posited that Hunter Biden resents his father so much that he's just screwing up, sort of subconsciously hoping he gets caught to take his father down. I don't know if I have that level of Oedipal analysis on Hunter Biden, but it sure would be interesting if Hunter Biden is the key to proving that Joe Biden is taking a lot of money from foreigners and he is selling out the United States. And if we can prove it, I want it proven. And if we can put him in prison, I want him in prison.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem that we've had with all this nonsense over the last 30, 40 years is that there's not any accountability.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that, it's the same thing that Durham was saying. If you don't have accountability, and this goes back to what we talked about 2 weeks ago, last time we were together, about the future of the country. If you know you have a system where even the fundamental system of justice can't be trusted to be fair and impartial, and then at the same time, a la Trump, they're going to steal the election from you, which, by the way, if he knows they're going to steal the election, why is he running for president again? Anyway, if, however, it just doesn't make logical sense, but if, however, you believe that the elections are being stolen, then that is a tacit admission that A, we have a system that must be reformed, that B, since they control elections and they won't allow people that they don't like to win elections, the possibility of democratic change has now been foreclosed. So there are no democratic means available to us for reforming the system. That leaves us with non-democratic means of reforming the system.
And we're seeing that. I mean, so I can't remember. We talked about, did we do this on the podcast, or maybe it was just you and I, but we talked about like this stuff going down in Atlanta, right, with Cop City, and how they're just saying, we're going to, burn it out.
Yeah, you keep building it, we'll keep burning it down.
And I mean, that's the kind of spark that will ignite a civil war eventually. It doesn't take, especially when we're so divided as we are right now, that it's not going to take that much of a spark. I mean, we already have lots of violence going on, and we absorb it and we, deal with it. But eventually it's just going to be too much. It's going to go over the top. And I just,
I don't know what the precipitating incident might be, but there are so many people now who think we have an unreformable system, that our elections are a meaningless fiction of democracy.
We can't elect our way out of this.
Yeah,
and that's the problem. Think about it. I mean, look, Trump, whoever might win the presidency. Okay, that's not going to mollify anyone. It's going to be, obviously, he will be, or she will be illegally elected, and we've seen this for the past.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter who wins. It doesn't matter who wins. One side or the other is going to see them as being fundamentally illegitimately elected.
Right, and so, I mean, how does that, winning the election is almost nothing. All it does is now, create a target, for the other side. And we don't have common values anymore. We used to, but we don't anymore. And I'm not going to go into
at this point,
why that might be.
At this point, I think the best thing that we can hope for is that we have some sort of big conference to figure out how we split up the country into different states and how we share the national debt.
Talking about Article 5?
Yeah, I think that's probably the only choice that we have at this point. However, we have another choice right now, which is to say good night, because we've been going on for about an hour and 15 minutes. So I think let's put a pin in this one, and we'll come back next week and see what's going on.
All right, brother.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Have a great week. All right. For the rest of you, you have been listening to or watching the podcast for June 25th, 2023. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We appreciate the fact that you do. Hope you'll be with us again next time. Until then, have a great week. So long.